I discussed myself. I have destroyed everything just for a fleeting thrill. For stolen moments that should never have existed. I let weakness drown me, allowing temptation to tarnish my dignity. Now, I sit here, engulfed in guilt, knowing that I have ruined my life. Lucas still doesn't know, but what will happen when he finds out? I will lose everything, and I deserve that. How can I let this happen? How can I betray the man who has trusted me? Who has given me his love and his home? I had always believed that marriage was meant to bring a sense of stability. A fresh start. A life woven together with love and commitment. Moving in with Lucas, my new husband, felt like stepping into the next chapter of my life, one that was supposed to be simple. Secure. But I hadn't expected Logan. At 22, he was just finishing school. Still finding his path. I thought nothing of it at first. After all, he was Lucas's son, my stepson, and we were just two people adjusting to a new family dynamic. Yet from the very first day, there was something about him I couldn't quite place, an energy. A quiet intensity in the way he observed me, how his presence seemed to fill a room without a single word. I dismissed it as my imagination, just the discomfort of change. But as the days passed, I felt it growing, the way he spoke to me, thoughtful, attentive, careful, the way his eyes held mine for a second too long, a sense of something unspoken, simmering beneath the surface. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, something restless had already begun to stir. At first, I convinced myself that nothing was different, that Logan was simply polite, mature beyond his years, the kind of young man any stepmother would be proud of. He was respectful, considerate, too considerate. He listened when I spoke. Really listened. His eyes locked onto mine as if I was the only person in the room. I tried to ignore the way his attention made my pulse quicken. The way I felt an odd sort of awareness whenever he was near. It was harmless, I told myself, completely innocent. But then, it started happening more often, the pauses, the lingering looks, the unspoken words that hummed in the silence between us. A simple good night would last just a moment too long. A touch, meant to be casual, would send a current through my skin that I couldn't ignore. One evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes, lost in thought, when I felt him step behind me. Not too close, but close enough that I could sense him. The heat of his body, the quiet weight of his presence. My breath caught in my throat, though I had no reason to feel nervous. "Need any help?" he asked. His voice low, smooth, effortless. I forced myself to smile, to act normal. "I've got it," I replied, turning slightly, only to realize he was watching me. Not in a casual way. Not in a way a stepson should. My heart skipped a beat. That night, lying in bed beside Lucas, I replayed every moment. Had I imagined it? Was I reading into something that wasn't there? I reminded myself that Logan was just being kind, just being himself. But my body told a different story. I felt restless, uneasy, and I hated that my thoughts kept drifting back to him. His voice, his presence, that look in his eyes. I tried to convince myself that I was simply adjusting to my new role as his stepmother. That the intensity I felt was merely a byproduct of a blended family finding its rhythm. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just me. Logan felt it too. I could see it in the way he hesitated before speaking to me. The way his hands clenched when our fingers accidentally brushed. The way his gaze lingered when he thought I wasn't looking. It was a slow burning realization. One I fought against with every rational thought I had. But the truth was undeniable. Something had shifted between us. And no matter how hard I tried to pretend otherwise, I couldn't escape the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something neither of us was ready to name. The morning air was thick with steam, curling lazily along the bathroom mirror as I ran a towel through my damp hair. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that came when Lucas was away on business. Leaving just Logan and me to occupy the space, I had fallen into a routine. Waking early, taking my time, allowing the silence to settle around me like a protective cocoon. But that morning, as I stood at the sink, absorbed in my thoughts, a sudden knock at the bathroom door sent a jolt through me. I froze, gripping the towel tighter around myself. Logan's voice came through, low and steady. "You in there?" My heart pounded unexpectedly at the sound of his voice. Too early. Too close. Too much. I swallowed, forcing myself to sound casual. Yeah, what's up? There was a pause, just long enough to be noticeable. I just need to grab something real quick. Do you mind if I come in? A small, rational part of my brain told me to say no. But his voice held nothing unusual. Nothing to suggest I should feel anything but normal. So why did my fingers tighten around the edge of the sink? Why did my breath feel unsteady? I hesitated, then forced a nod to myself. Sure, come in. The door opened, and Logan stepped inside, his movements deliberate yet unhurried. He was dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt. His hair still tousled from sleep. His presence suddenly too solid, too real in the confined space. I turned back to the mirror, focusing on my reflection, on the damp strands of hair clinging to my neck. Anything but him. I heard him rummaging through the cabinet, but I could feel his presence behind me, the awareness of him pressing into the air like a quiet hum. I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes on my reflection, willing myself to ignore the way the steam softened the edges of my face, the way my skin still held the warmth of the shower. But then, the rummaging stopped. Got it. His voice was quieter this time. I expected him to leave, to step back and close the door behind him. But he didn't. Instead, I felt his gaze settle on me, heavy, lingering. I met his eyes in the mirror. And in that moment, something shifted. His expression, his posture, the air itself. You look different. The words were soft, almost hesitant, as if they had escaped before he could stop them. My breath hitched. Different? I turned slightly, my fingers tightening around the towel. Different how? Logan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly. He looked away for a second, as if trying to gather his thoughts. But when his gaze met mine again, something passed between us, something undeniable. It was more than curiosity. It was awareness, recognition, a moment that cracked the carefully built walls we had both been hiding behind. A warning bell rang in my mind, screaming at me to break the moment, to laugh it off, to do anything but let it linger. But I couldn't move, neither could he. I tried to forget about that morning in the bathroom. I told myself it was a fleeting moment, an accident of circumstance, nothing more. But the problem with tension is that once it's acknowledged, it doesn't disappear, it lingers. It sits in the air between two people, thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. And between Logan and me, it had only gotten stronger. Over the next few days, everything seemed normal on the surface. Logan and I still talked over morning coffee, still passed each other in the hallways, still exchanged casual remarks as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every word, every glance carried an undertone of something we refused to name. Every touch, even the accidental ones, sent a spark through me that I knew I should ignore. I tried to blame my own imagination, to convince myself that it was just the adjustment of becoming a stepmother to a grown man. That I was misreading things, overthinking. But then there were the moments I couldn't explain away. Like the way his eyes would linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking. Or the way he always seemed to be near me, even when he didn't have to be. Or the way my stomach twisted in knots whenever he walked into a room. It was becoming unbearable. One evening, we found ourselves outside on the back porch, sitting in the dim glow of the setting sun. It had become part of our routine, late-night talks, quiet companionship. But tonight, the silence between us was different. Charged, stifling, unspoken words clawing at the edges of our restraint. I could feel Logan watching me. I should have ignored it. I should have stood up, made an excuse, walked away. But instead, I turned to face him, my heart hammering in my chest. Logan, I hesitated, unsure what I even wanted to say. He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. You feel it too, don't you? His voice was low, almost hesitant, but there was no mistaking the meaning behind his words. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My fingers curled against the wooden armrest of my chair. Denial was the safer option. It was the smarter option. But I couldn't lie. I don't know what you mean, I whispered, even though I did. Logan exhaled, shaking his head with a quiet, almost bitter laugh. You do. A long silence stretched between us, the night air wrapping around us like a secret. The weight of his words pressed into my chest, suffocating and thrilling all at once. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to admit that my body had already betrayed me. But I couldn't pretend anymore. I wasn't just imagining this. We had stepped into something dangerous. Something that could destroy us both. The moment had been building for days. Perhaps even weeks. Stretching between Logan and me like an invisible thread pulling us closer. Tightening with every glance. Every lingering moment in passing. I had spent countless nights lying awake. Telling myself it was nothing. That I could ignore it. Suppress it. Control it. But the truth was, I had already lost control. Every breath I took in his presence felt heavier. Every interaction tinged with something unsaid. Something too dangerous to speak into existence. And yet, in the silence, we both knew. That night, the tension finally snapped. I was in the living room. Curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. My mind restless. Unable to focus on the book in my hands. Lucas had called earlier to say he'd be extending his trip by another day. Relief had washed over me at first. But then came the sinking realization. That meant another night alone with Logan. Another night pretending the air between us wasn't suffocating. I heard him before I saw him. The quiet padding of his footsteps as he entered the room. He hesitated in the doorway. I didn't look up, but I felt it. That unbearable presence that made my skin prickle. My breath catch. He stood there for a long moment before finally walking in and sitting across from me. Neither of us spoke at first. It was Logan who finally shattered the silence. I can't do this anymore. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around my wine glass. Do what? You know what? I forced myself to look at him. To meet his gaze. His expression was unreadable. His hands clasped together as if he was trying to steady himself. Logan, my voice was a whisper. Barely audible over the pounding of my heart. He shook his head. You can't tell me you don't feel it. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That he was confused. That this was just some strange misplaced attachment. But the words wouldn't come. Because he wasn't wrong. And we both knew it. The air in the room grew thick. Pressing down on us. A million thoughts flashed through my mind. Lucas. The consequences. The sheer impossibility of what was happening. But none of them mattered in that moment. Not when Logan stood up and took a slow, deliberate step toward me. I should have stopped him. I should have left the room. Instead, I stayed. When he finally reached me, standing so close I could feel the warmth of his body. My breath hitched. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Then he kissed me. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that stripped away every lie, every excuse, every pretense I had built around myself. And the worst part? I kissed him back. The moment my lips met Logan's, the world around me collapsed. It was reckless, dangerous, so incredibly wrong. And yet, I didn't stop. My hands found their way to his chest. Feeling the warmth of his skin through his shirt. The steady rise and fall of his breath. His fingers grazed my cheek. Hesitant yet firm, as if afraid I'd slip away. But I didn't. I stayed. I leaned in. And for those fleeting seconds, I let myself forget Lucas. Forget the reality waiting beyond this moment. Forget that this was a fire we could never hope to contain. And then, as suddenly as it started, it was over. I pulled away first, gasping as if I had surfaced from deep water, drowning in everything we had just done. What had I done? My hands trembled as I pressed them against my face, my breath shaky and uneven. Across from me, Logan stared, his lips slightly parted, his eyes still dark with the intensity of what had just happened. Neither of us spoke. The silence that had once carried so much tension now felt unbearable. Stifling, crushing. I need to go, I whispered, my voice barely there. Logan didn't try to stop me. He only watched as I stumbled to my feet, nearly knocking over my glass of wine in my rush to escape. My mind was a tangled mess of emotions as I hurried to my bedroom. Slamming the door behind me and pressing my back against it, my chest heaved with every breath. My skin burning where he had touched me. I should have felt relief. I should have felt disgust. Instead, all I felt was desperation. I sank onto the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets as if they could anchor me. My mind replayed the moment over and over again, the way his lips felt against mine. The way his hands had hesitated but still held on. The way it had felt so impossibly right in the most unforgivable way. A sob caught in my throat. What was wrong with me? I was married to his father. I loved Lucas. Didn't I? The guilt crashed over me like a wave. Suffocating and relentless. I could still hear Logan's voice in my head. The way he had said, "You can't tell me you don't feel it." And I hated that I couldn't. I couldn't lie. Because I did feel it. I had felt it for weeks. Creeping up on me in stolen glances. In fleeting touches. In the way my body reacted before my mind could stop it. Tears blurred my vision as I climbed under the sheets, pulling them tightly around me as if I could bury the shame deep enough that it would disappear. But it wouldn't. It clung to me, seeped into my skin. I had made a terrible mistake. And worst of all, I wasn't sure I regretted it. The moment Lucas walked through the front door, suitcase in hand, a warm smile spread across his face. I felt my stomach drop. Guilt sank its claws into me, twisting deep, sharp and unforgiving. He wrapped his arms around me, pressing a firm kiss to my cheek as if nothing had changed. As if I wasn't standing there suffocating under the weight of my betrayal. I had kissed his son. I had wanted his son. And now, I had to look him in the eyes and pretend none of it had happened. I forced a smile, plastered on a mask so carefully crafted that even I almost believed it. Almost. "Missed you," Lucas murmured against my hair. His arms still wrapped around me. I could feel Logan's presence just a few feet away, standing stiffly near the staircase, watching us. My skin burned where his lips had been just a night ago. The contrast between them, between the man I had promised my life to and the one who had somehow stolen my breath, was unbearable. Logan didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, pressing in from all sides. But Lucas, oblivious, trusting Lucas, didn't seem to notice. He was too busy telling us about his trip, recounting business meetings and delayed flights. His voice the only sound filling the living room. But I wasn't listening. I couldn't. I was too caught up in trying to breathe, trying not to crumble under the weight of Logan's silent stare, trying not to let my eyes betray me when they flickered to him. Catching that fleeting glint of something raw, something dangerous, something I wasn't ready to face. Dinner that evening was unbearable. Lucas sat at the head of the table, laughing, completely unaware of the way Logan and I avoided looking at each other. Avoided speaking too much. Avoided everything. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my glass of wine. Desperate for something to soothe the ache in my chest. The storm in my mind. "Logan, you all right?" Lucas asked, mid-chew, finally sensing that something was off. Logan barely looked up. "Yeah," he said, voice tight. "Just tired." Tired. I nearly laughed. I was exhausted. Exhausted from lying. From pretending. From holding my breath every time Logan so much as shifted in his seat. As the night dragged on, I found myself retreating to the bedroom as soon as I could. Locking the door behind me as if that alone could keep my thoughts from chasing me down. Consuming me, I sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand over my face. I couldn't do this. I couldn't keep walking through this house, through this life, pretending that what happened between Logan and me hadn't changed everything. And yet, I had no idea how to stop. No idea how to undo the damage already done. The morning after Lucas returned, I woke up with an unbearable heaviness in my chest. Sleep had been restless, broken by dreams I couldn't decipher, images of Logan, of Lucas, of the walls of this house closing in on me. The weight of my choices loomed over me like a shadow, stretching long and unrelenting. I rolled over, glancing at Lucas's sleeping form beside me. His breath even, his face relaxed, blissfully unaware. I envied him for that. I envied the simplicity of his emotions, the security he felt in our marriage. If only he knew, if only he could feel the storm raging inside me. By the time I made it downstairs, Logan was already in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, his fingers wrapped around a coffee mug. He looked different, tired, worn. The easy confidence I had always associated with him was gone, replaced by something heavier, something more fragile. His eyes flickered up as I entered the room. And for a brief moment, everything else disappeared. Just us. Just the truth sitting between us. Unspoken yet impossible to ignore. "We need to talk," I said softly, gripping the back of a chair as if it could steady me. Logan nodded, setting his mug down. I know. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the space between us feeling at once too small and too vast. I swallowed hard, gathering my thoughts, but every word I wanted to say felt wrong. How do you explain something that never should have happened? How do you make sense of the impossible? I love Lucas, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I love him, and I don't want to hurt him. Logan's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists on the table. And yet, here we are. I closed my eyes for a brief second, exhaling shakily. I don't know what this is between us. Logan, I don't know how it started or why it feels so, I trailed off, shaking my head, but I know that we can't keep pretending this isn't happening. He leaned forward slightly, his voice raw. So what are you saying? I hesitated, my heart hammering painfully against my ribs. What was I saying? That I wanted to end it? That I could walk away from this magnetic pull between us? That I could go back to being just Lucas's wife, just his stepmother, without feeling like a piece of me was missing? I think we need space, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Time to figure out what this is, if it's real, or if it's just something we imagined. Logan's face hardened, but there was something vulnerable in his eyes. And what if it is real? I swallowed, my throat tight. Then everything we've built will come crashing down. But I couldn't say that. Instead, I reached across the table, letting my fingers brush against his one last time. Then we'll have to figure out what comes next. And deep down, I knew that no matter what I chose, nothing would ever be the same. Life is full of complex emotions and forbidden temptations. But the choices we make define our integrity. In today's world, relationships are often tested by unspoken desires, emotional loneliness, and blurred boundaries, especially in blended families or close-knit spaces. The key is to recognize the weight of emotional connections before they spiral into irreversible mistakes. If you ever find yourself in a situation where your feelings conflict with your responsibilities, step back, reflect, and seek clarity before acting. Temporary passion can lead to lifelong consequences, and true love, built on trust and respect, never comes at the cost of betraying others.